Question number 6, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister responsible for Housing New Zealand and asks, does he stand by his statement that, quote, "I can commit to all public services involved with these families taking the steps that they ought to take to prevent as tragic an outcome as a death"?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
A supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Will the Minister instruct Housing New Zealand to provide every state house built before 2000 with thermal quality curtains and carpeted floors as a step to prevent as tragic an outcome as a death?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, I'd have to check the detailed information, where since Housing New Zealand has insulated all state houses that can be insulated, unlike previous governments, they now do supply heating in those houses which can't be insulated. There will be a question, of course, of whether that goes as far as particular grade of thermal drapes or carpet. We would expect it to be of a reasonable standard.
Point of order, sir. It was a very clear question asking the Minister as to whether he would give instructions to Housing New Zealand. It's not an answer.
Order. I'm going to, on this occasion, allow the repeat of the question. I suspect it has been addressed. It was not a very clear question in my mind, but it was a supplementary question that was accepted. I invite the member to ask it again for the benefit of myself and the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Metiria Turei.
Will the Minister instruct Housing New Zealand to provide every state house built before 2000 with thermal quality curtains and carpeted floors as a step to prevent as tragic an outcome as a death?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no need to instruct Housing New Zealand. They have a standard to which they maintain their houses. Fortunately, it's the highest standard it's ever been. But the member needs to keep in mind the original comments for which she asked the primary question, and that is where there are families where there is real health risk, there is almost certainly a range of other issues involved, other health issues, long-term welfare dependency, lack of access to work or education, and the approach this government takes through social investment is to try and deal with the range of issues from the point of view of the family, not just one, such as the heating in the house, although of course that's important.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister instruct Housing New Zealand to provide every state house built before 2000 that has unlined block walls with lining as a step to prevent as tragic an outcome as a death?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Housing New Zealand, in the light of this case, will certainly be considering what its maintenance standards are, but the requirement of them will be to reach a reasonable standard. That's a bit different from, guarantees about exactly what happens with each family in each house.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Jamie Lee Ross.
What steps is the government taking to support vulnerable families by delivering more warm, dry homes where they are most needed?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a number in train. The government has spent, we've been spending more than $300 million every year maintaining these homes, of course, to standards relevant today rather than when they were built, which is far too many of them back in the 50s and 60s. We'll continue with an insulation program that has insulated 280,000 old, cold, damp homes through the Warm Up New Zealand program. So we've spent around $30 million to provide heating in about 2,000 homes where that is important. And thermal curtains have been installed in around 17,000 homes since February 2013. It's in addition to investing over the next 3 years through the Housing New Zealand Asset Management Strategy $2.9 billion to build and upgrade state housing, still overcoming a legacy of 50 years of policy that wasn't that sensible, and in between national governments incompetent Labor governments who took state housing for granted.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister instruct Housing New Zealand to, as a matter of urgency, move every family whose doctors say they are at serious risk of a life-threatening respiratory illness from their cold, damp state house to a warm and dry, safe state house?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, where I think there may be some common ground here, Mr Speaker, is that I think, and this hasn't been instructed, I think that where there are indications of significant health issues, such as the admission of a child to hospital, that should be picked up by a range of social services and acted on, as it is now for rheumatic fever, but such a straightforward notification process, appropriate sharing of information, which too many people are still unwilling to do, could lead to a benefit for families that experiencing health problems. But with respect to moving every one of these to another warm, dry house, that would be a lot easier if our city planning wasn't distorted by green-type policies that prevent the building of affordable, reasonable standard houses on the scale that we need. Housing New Zealand has the same issues as everyone else in Auckland. There's a shortage of houses because of 20 years of green-type policies that stop them being built.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Isn't it a fact that Emilita Bourne's family was identified as being at risk because of the illness of those children and not moved from their cold, damp house until after she was dead?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd have to look back into the details of the case, but if the member is raising the issue that across state agencies there's not enough information shared about the risks to some of these families, then she would be correct. And that is, too often the professionals involved and sometimes the agencies involved think it's inappropriate to share information that would allow better servicing of those families. And right now, we're looking at addressing a large number of information sharing agreements to try and resolve that problem, because we believe information that is held, which could help avoid this kind of tragic outcome, is probably not the best way to deal with it.
A supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Has the Minister received any advice on the cost of carpets and curtains and wall linings for those state houses without it versus the benefit of saving tenants' lives? And if so, what is his cost per life ratio?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, not specifically in that form, although I'd have to say that that view of the expenditure is completely consistent with our social investment framework, and that is where it's clear there are benefits that exceed the costs, and we're willing to spend more money. Often it's as simple as knowing which families are at risk, which agencies knew that, what information has been provided to people who can make decisions to make that kind of expenditure.
Question number 7.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Is the Minister therefore confirming that he is making an assessment as to the risk of death of infants like Emilita Bourne or of young fathers like Soreve Tovo against the cost of providing carpet and curtains and wall linings for the cold, damp state homes that they are living in? Is that what he just told us?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, certainly not in those terms, and if only because the cases the member's referring to have their own complexities and circumstances that are not amenable to simple economic calculations of that nature. I'm simply making the point, a general point, that long-term dependency associated with poor levels of housing do flow through to longer-term costs. We all understand that, and I would have thought the member, instead of opposing the social housing reform program, might now see these couple of high-profile deaths as a catalyst to supporting reform in the state housing program so we can achieve some of the things she wants to achieve.
Question number 7, the Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr. Speaker.